Hi, I'm Trevor Sookraj. I'm in this year's Forbes 30 Under 30 list for marketing and advertising, and I'm here to give you my 3 tips about running a business in the upcoming Roaring 20s. $60. Probably at least an hour and a half. I'm not a very much of a morning person. Falling over in the chairlift line. An upcoming marketing trend is automating Twitter outreach and engagement. Guelph, Ontario. Jack Dorsey. Limitless. Talking to my therapist. Reliving life experiences are good, but not always fun. Playing FIFA. Go Spurs. GIF. Definitely GIF. Raw meat experiment on Instagram. Pretty dumb, but can't say I'm not impressed. I'd say I hover around 2 to 3. I quote The Office way too much for my own good. Active listening. Definitely The Office. So B2B SaaS startups should really have a bias for product marketing, and knowing their customer is the basis for any type of growth experimentation that you'd want to run. You have to remember that at the early stage, your first 10 customers to your next 40 customers, next 100 customers, all of those are going to impact how your product grows, how you build out your sales team, and try to convert initial signups into paying customers. A lot of this growth experimentation is key in order to kind of inform what that looks like. If there's no consistency or repeatability between the customers you're acquiring, you won't be able to scale predictably, and that's one of the biggest misses for companies that are trying to hit higher levels of revenue and funding. Focus on first identifying the assumptions about your customers. So what you think they care about and they're pained by. You can usually do this by talking to your existing pilot customers, doing customer research, kind of understanding how they talk about their lives and their challenges. Then you're going to want to map those to hypotheses. So why your product solves the pain points and problems that those customers think they have, and specifically the role your product kind of plays with that as a hypothesis. And then that's how you're going to map that into actual tests and experiments based on where those customers actually exist. So if you know that these customers are likely to be online in certain areas, and you want to be able to test whether your hypothesis is correct about the product, you can then kind of create some of those experiments and have very clear benchmarks on what you want to hit in order to make it successful. To give you an example, if I know that I'm trying to go in front of maybe like it's engineers on a specific platform like Google search or something, based off knowing they have a certain pain point and having my product appear there is going to be relevant. Maybe I'm trying to target a 20% conversion rate on getting a click to form submission with 100 clicks or click to free trial. If it's maybe targeting, maybe it's construction foreman and in the construction tech industry, and I'm doing outbound email, maybe I want to have at least 200 people on that segment where I can say, let's get between a 1.5% and 3% response rate to be successful. And that's going to pan out to X number of demos that will be qualified. So those are all things that I would say are important when you're facilitating some of the experiments. As your company scales, you want to keep that experimentation with what we call the 70-20-10 rule. So 70% of your budget is spent on things that work and are repeatable parts of your engine. 20% are on ongoing tests, typically stuff you've already tried, but maybe you're not at stat sake or have enough information to make a decision off of. And then 10% of that budget on net new tests if you have hunches or high conviction behind. No matter what scale your company is, whether it's a seed stage company all the way to a public company like Samsara or Shopify, it's important to have that growth experimentation and testing framework in play, because that's how you continuously learn more about your customers, what works, what doesn't, and you're never just sitting stagnant as a regular marketer. Sales and marketing alignment is such a good question, and it's so crucial for any organization that's trying to scale. Often I've seen it at bigger organizations, it actually involves a lot of finger pointing. So the sales team will look to the marketing team and say, you're giving us bad lead, that's why they're not converting. Whereas the marketing team looks at the sales team and says, you're not working them properly, and that's why they're not converting and to actual customers. So it's a lot of back and forth, and it can be a pretty touchy relationship for a lot of organizations. That's why when you start your growth organization at a company and try to build that out, you have to make sure you get that sales buy-in as a marketer. So that means looking at your existing customers, understanding why they bought before, what were their main objections, who was qualified but wasn't ready for a sales conversation and not ready to buy, and if so, like how can we nurture those types of leads and how to actually get outcomes from them in the future and make sure they stay warm. So those are all things that taking an active interest in how salespeople do their job, not making assumptions, and really trying to learn from them can be super helpful to getting that strong relationship from day one. Practically, as far as getting alignment, especially if you're working in an organization that is largely sales led and coming on as a head of growth and marketing, you really need to figure out what is sales doing currently and how can it be amplified or augmented with growth marketing. So for an example, a lot of sales teams work with what we call personal emails. So they have their name at the company's core domain.com, but they're not working with what we call burner domains. So if you're working at doing a cold outbound email to different lists, you want to make sure you're using new domains that are warmed up and ready for outreach. That way, if you get flagged as spam or anything happens, it doesn't actually ruin the core experience for the product. So if you can warm up those new domains as a marketer and show how you get increased engagement rates and other tactics, by doing that in comparison to the original efforts, you're probably going to get more buy-in from sales. Likewise, like if they're doing outbound email solely, maybe you want to layer in LinkedIn automations or things that via Linked Helper or Phantom Buster, other tools that can show value for them. Because if you can do that, maybe you might increase their response rates from 3% to 5% or 6%, and they have more appetite to say, well, maybe you can then add cloud cover ads on certain platforms in front of their accounts they want to go after, or other ideas. They'll also be probably more likely to participate in marketing material in other areas that you need help with to be able to make a better case for cold leads that are coming in through the door. One of the examples that comes to mind here for a company that we love working with is Samba TV. They're in the MarTech space, and we're working as their de facto growth team, helping them to expand to new channels and test products and new verticals. They have a pretty large sales force as far as actual reps that are selling the product, but a relatively small growth demand gen team. And we're very powerful when you look at lead quality, sales cycles, how prospects engage with them post form submission, especially when you're selling a product that is not an overnight sale and is typically an enterprise or account-based marketing type approach. So as long as you can make sure you take a serious interest in how sales is operating and not just operate as demand generation and actually operate as full funnel growth, that's usually a big win for getting sales and marketing alignment at any organization. So we tried a lot of strategies with different companies, and I'll preface this by saying that a lot of these are just specific to the company that you work with, and it's usually about taking a serious interest in the customer, the full funnel, the experience, and then coming up with ideas that are offsets of that, opposed to finding hacks or strategies that might work in certain scenarios. But hopefully this is helpful from a sharing perspective. So the first company that comes to mind that we worked with called Live Control, that was playing in the kind of hardware software space for recording and streaming events that typically happened a lot during the pandemic, like funerals or church services, that sort of thing. They're a LA-based company. They were seed stage when they came on to work with us. And the founder was managing growth himself along with various agencies and realized it just wasn't sustainable. So they brought on Divisional to actually lead out their growth and run channel experiments and analytics and tracking and get on with the sales team. And a lot of what we did in the earlier days was looking at how their different prospects at high volumes were interacting with their pages and kind of what the experience was for the sales reps once they actually converted to a call. One thing we realized was there was a lot of education that had to happen with this product. So it wasn't as easy as just driving someone to a landing page and then having them like book a demo call. That worked via Typeform. We realized that a lot of the education should happen before they actually get on the call. So one of the things that we subbed out was using this product called Video Ask instead of Typeform, which is actually run by Typeform, where you can basically offer customized videos for people that are clicking on certain answers in a form submission process, and then get a video that's relevant to that. So it's almost answering their responses and concerns based on what's happening from that. And it actually worked out really well. They raised a 30 mil Series A in May 2021 and hired someone directly from our team to lead out growth for them full time. So that was a great outcome that kind of came from, again, taking an interest in the customer and really seeing, like, from a conversion rate and sales enablement perspective, like, what does that actually look like full funnel? Another company that comes to mind here, this company called Boutique, that works with it's an e-commerce SaaS company that helps businesses who typically have an in-store, in-person presence to connect with online visitors. So initially, we were testing a lot of broad audiences with e-commerce stores, like Shopify customers, and just seeing what kind of resonated. And a lot of it, responses were, this is interesting from customers, or from prospects, but they weren't actually converting into customers. And we realized that it was about having specific pains related to what Boutique solves. So certain companies really had those pains. We just had to figure out how to identify those types of companies. We realized that there were actually companies that were using like Zoom and Calendly to book those type of meetings with in-store reps and doing like an online session. And that was a real pain point because it wasn't very effective. So we actually built out a targeted list using those prospects and got like a much higher demo conversion rate, even in the range of like 8 to 10 demos, qualified demos a month, just via outbound email, by running that at a more targeted segment. So thinking again about the customer and what they experienced, that was a great outcome for them. The last one that comes to mind is this company called Quickly. They're a construction tech company, started out of the Boundless Venture Studio, that basically builds a platform that allows people to rent equipment online. So we're testing a lot of their verticals using search engine marketing via Google Ads, and wanted to figure out how could we see which ones had the most amount of salience and where they should kind of build their product around. So we built landers for equipment rental, heavy equipment rental, like cranes and et cetera, party rentals, like, tents and those kind of pieces, and other offshoots of that, and realized that there were certain verticals that had either higher conversion rates into the actual customer and demo funnel, and looking not at just like what the cost per form submission was and booked demo, but actually what the customer acquisition cost was on a larger sample size. So in the last year, we actually drove about 90% of their inbound volumes using some of those tactics, and help them to actually hire an account executive, handle that demand, and kind of get additional capital to drive greater success for them. But that was another example of having specific strategies, again, that are kind of based on testing hypotheses or assumptions about your customer, and using that to kind of drive some of the big growth wins they got in the last year. So a popular question I get a lot is, when do I use an agency or freelancer, and when do I actually make a full-time hire for my business? This comes up the most, I would say, at seed stage, where you're looking at founders who have capital, have a small team, largely product and engineering, and are trying to think about how can I build out my sales and growth funnel to be able to drive demand and scale my product. And their part-time talent's probably the best way to do that without making big commitments. The big commitment problem is largely because full-time hires take a while to find. We've seen that it takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months to find a good head of growth hire that fits your culture, aligns with your team, and will come in and hit the ground running. So recruiting isn't easy, not to mention the amount of time it takes founders to actually interview candidates and figure out who's a good fit at that stage, which again is obviously not the best use of their time, given that they're running the company, along with the equity and ownership you have to give them. So all these things kind of climax in saying, how can we offer agencies or part-time resources for a better avenue or outcome for some of these startups. Agencies are really good when you have transactional needs. So if you're creating a video for a specific purpose, you need it animated, that's a great use case. If you're doing a web redesign that has very specific outcomes, that could be a good use case. That's where agencies, I would say, come in really useful and can be a big help. And that's because most agencies are verticalized. They focus on specific channels or aspects of your growth, whether it's design, search engine marketing, email marketing, content, SEO, et cetera. Those are all areas that can be pretty transactional if you know what you need. And it's most popular, I would say, when you scale and start to hit product market fit, because that's exactly when you know exactly what you need to do. You just need help doing it, because your team's pretty strapped for resources. So, for example, if you have clear audience and clear messaging, and you've had repeatability on acquiring customers with that type of pitch, maybe you do hire a paid ads agency to take over your channel optimization and running them, run consistent refreshes and keep things optimized there. Because they're not really doing a ton of net new things to really drive the results or new tests that you want to do. And if you have those ideas, you can probably quarterback them for an agency, because it's pretty outsourced. Whereas if you're unsure about those clear audiences, repeatability in your customers, those pieces, outsourcing to an agency or a freelancer can be a major issue, because you won't have visibility into why things aren't working, and you'll assume that it's probably the agency that's the problem. But in a lot of cases, they're not built to handle that type of ambiguity and full funnel growth that you need from a full-time hire. And that's usually why what I recommend you going the full-time hire route, working with a company or an individual specifically that can kind of plug into your org. And that's a lot of what we do at Divisional is build growth teams for companies that have that need the head of growth and growth marketing manager hire. So they're able to actually have that effectiveness of being plugged into their organization, looking full funnel, not just at the demand generation, but also the product sales, customer success, et cetera, which you won't get again with a lot of agencies that are strictly focused on specific aspects of the product. But we also see that there's a lot of value in more transactional engagements with agencies where it doesn't make sense to hire someone on a short-term engagement full-time with your company. And it also wouldn't make sense to have someone owning it if it's just a very transactional activity.